You may need a copy of our materials. Anybody else need a copy? We've got a card here for Tom Holland. A number of years ago, and this was a number of years ago, the elders, and of course, none of the elders at that time were elders then, but they put me in charge of contacting Tom to see when he'd have an open year to hold a meeting for us. Well, 2020. Wait a minute. He's not going to get to hold a meeting for us because that's next year. And he's under hospice care presently. And of course, he has been unable to travel for quite some time, you know. Since the very beginning of the lectureship, they started at Dayton on Saturday, the first Saturday in November, I guess, or December, one of them. Then he came from the very beginning, and then, of course, a couple of years ago, he had to cancel out of that. He has been the recipient of many Lifetime Achievement Awards, but he wasn't able to show up, and so they had to give it to Jim. Jim got a plaque, you know, thankful for Tom Holland, you know, so it's the wrong fella. But Jim had to take Tom's place because he was unable to be there. And I'm not sure exactly how old Tom is, but he's got to be getting close to 90 if he's not 90. Yeah. It's been quite a while ago. So he, for some reason, now he is under hospice care. Of course, we know that hospice care does not mean what I used to think it meant, you know, that you only have a couple of days left, because it's just a way of taking care of your needs up to and including being there 24/7 if need be. And of course, I've known of individuals that for 2 years were under hospice care. So, but it's different circumstances dictate that. So anyhow, though we have a card here that we're going to pass around, let everybody sign it, and each classroom has one, and we'll send them to Tom and see how much that wears him out of just opening cards and trying to read and say, I think I know that fella there, or I know that woman there. As far as I know, Tom has never held a meeting or never spoke here at Dunlap, but of course most of us have opportunity to hear him when he's been in close proximity to us. Of course, a number of years ago at the Memorial Auditorium, we had a joint effort, and that's been quite a few years ago too, and he was the featured speaker in that arrangement. And I remember going and sitting in what used to be called the dress circle in the Memorial Auditorium. It's no longer there, of course, and that building was full of brethren, and I could tell you some other things that happened during that effort, but that would tell how long ago it was. You know, so many. 83. It was 83. Wow, that's just almost impossible. How could I even remember back that long ago? So we'll just give this to Rev and let her start. If you don't have anything to write with, don't worry about it. You can sign it at the back there. We'll just sort of pass it around in an inconspicuous way and try to kill two birds with one stone. How's that sound? Oh, the pen goes with it. I always try to steal a good pen. Here. I'm sorry. I stole a pen. I used to be able to steal one every Monday morning at the post at the bank, and then they quit putting them out there, so I'm short now on pen.
That situation you were traveling, I filled in from that old Philadelphia Memorial.
Yes.
And I'm sorry that he wasn't able to, because he never got to preach at that meeting, you know, where you have different speakers. So
Yeah. Yeah.
And I spoke up and I said, well, I've always wanted to be Tom.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. If I had my druthers, I'd druther too.
So I put that plaque in my study for a good while.
I don't.
I didn't know it said Tom Holland.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you. But Tom, of course, longtime preacher of preachers. You know, he of course was a Bible teacher at Freed Hardeman when I was there. Of course, I didn't have any classes with him because I wasn't going to be a preacher. And most of the classes that he taught were for upper level Bible students anyhow. And so I was not in any of his classes, but certainly we've benefited from his work down through the years, and sure will miss him and his influence for sure. He is a great and a godly man. Well, we're on page number 105 in this particular series we've been studying. We're studying heart diseases and cures for heart diseases. And just so happens, Mickey's back with us tonight after having 3 bypasses, but that's not the kind of heart problems we're talking about. Now, that's a problem for sure. Mickey had to walk himself to the emergency room. Now, that's desperate for heart care, isn't it? You know, you got to walk yourself to the emergency room and then go across the mountain and have 3 bypasses. But that's what happened. And that's a very serious matter, obviously, you know, and we're constantly bombarded with all type of information just today. Because last night went over to Greens Lake Road and had to do some visiting in Chattanooga, but I went to Greens Lake Road and they made the announcement before the services started that Cheryl Judd, who couldn't be much older than me, had a massive stroke yesterday, and they didn't expect her to live through the night. And her husband, Larry, preaches, is one of the preachers at Ooltewah, and Larry was preaching at Rising Fawn the last time I held a meeting down at Rising Fawn, Georgia. And so, and their kids went to Fall Creek Falls Bible Camp with us 100 years ago, you know. And but then lo and behold, then this morning I got a text, and Larry said that it was a difference in night and day from yesterday to today, because while they didn't expect her to live through the night, this morning she's talking and eating breakfast. And so that's just amazing. And of course, Roger Campbell said, your prayer really came through, Freddie, because I mentioned her in prayer. And so we must depend upon God to get through difficult situations like that and be satisfied with whatever happens. But certainly, as we approach the throne of God in behalf of our brothers and sisters in Christ, we're doing so with the realization that God can providentially do something. And certainly the prognosis was not good, and everything turned out a whole lot better presently. So let's continue to keep Cheryl in our thoughts and prayers. And so the very first thing that I saw this morning, and I was checking my mail on my internet, it said, go get your veins checked or arteries checked or whatever to make sure you're not fixing to have a stroke. You know, I mean, that's right on the heels of Cheryl having a stroke, you know. And of course, you can do those 5 things if you're as old as I am, as old as Donna is, you know. And you can do it for like $135. They can check it and make sure you don't have clogged arteries in your neck or in your legs or everywhere, you know. I'm scared to do that. I'm afraid they'd tell me to quit eating peanut butter, so I'm not going to do it. So, and hopefully I won't fall over with a stroke anytime soon, or a heart attack, either one. But that's not the type of problems we're talking about here. We're talking about spiritual problems. And while we should, obviously, try to take care of our physical selves best we can, we know that bodily exercise profiteth a little, you know, godliness is profitable for all things. So we're trying to exercise ourselves to godliness and righteous living so that heaven one day might be our eternal home. And these are maladies that can affect our spiritual heart, our spiritual mind, our intellect, our emotions, our will, to the point where we can end up lost eternally. So obviously, if we have a prescription in how to avoid these types of things that could cause our spiritual demise, then we need to take advantage of it. You know, we got spiritual health instruction available for us right here in God's Word, and we'd be foolish not to take advantage of it. And we've gone through a whole bunch, 12 already, and we've made our way to number 13, and it has to do with prejudice. Now, I don't know if they see that Brother Winkler felt this would be a good one to end on, or this is one that needed more time spent on, or what, but we know for a fact, you know, this is a problem. Prejudice is a problem. As John pointed out Sunday morning, everybody's prejudiced to a certain extent. And the person that says, I don't have a prejudice bone in my body, well, all you have to do is ask a few questions, and you might realize maybe I am a little bit prejudiced, because you used the example. If you saw somebody walking down the road, how would you describe that person? Did you see that man walking down the road? Or did you see that Mexican walking down the road? Did you see that black man walking down the road? Did you see that foreigner running, you know. Was it a man? Well, it was a man, I think, you know. Well, why all those different designations for that person walking down the road other than just that was a man, you know? Now, of course, that could be up for grabs too, you know, in the society we live in presently. But if we're not careful, that it can erode our thinking about our fellow human being. And certainly, we have to strive to have the attitude of Christ, who we know was no respecter of persons. And we should have that same attitude as well. And while nobody said it'd be easy, nobody said it would not take effort on our part, we can overcome and have the right attitude towards others in spite of the fact that we live in a world in which prejudice seems to be the common way to go. We're going to look at an example here in a few minutes, but I'll just go up to the top of the page real quick. And because we talked about just a little bit about the new ideas, different methods that we're not familiar with, and sometimes those methods and expedient things expedient way to do certain things are frowned upon simply because of them being different or being new, being novel. And of course, sometimes we have to point out, Jesus Loves Me used to be a new song. Can you imagine somebody saying, I ain't never heard that song before. Why are we singing new songs like Jesus Loves Me? Why can't we be satisfied with that? Well, at one time, just about every song we sing was a brand new song, you know. So we can't just discard something because it's new, or else we wouldn't have anything to sing. Now, obviously, if it's unscriptural, we ain't got no business singing it to begin with, but we're not talking about that problem. We're talking about something just because it's new. And, of course, there can be the opposite extreme. People are so caught up sometimes on the novelty of things or the newness of things that that's all they want to sing, you know. Even though it may be that the one that's leading the singing is the only one that knows it. Well, let's save that song for singing night, how about it? And learn to sing it rather than on a Sunday morning when the building's full and all of a sudden you're singing a solo up there and nobody in the whole congregation knows it, you know. So, and that's a problem too, you know. I don't like a songbook, somebody says. Well, guess what? Everybody don't have the great memory that you do of being able to recite all 5 verses of the song that you want to lead, you know. So give us a number so that we can read along with it and maybe assist you in worshiping God in song. How about that, you know? So many times it's just plain old common sense that maybe is not as common as it ought to be. So how do we overcome prejudice towards new ideas and methods? First, we must come to cultivate this attitude. When a thing is proven to definitely expedite the Lord's work and can be practiced within the confines of scriptural authority, with no precept, example, or necessary inference being violated, then you can count me in, I'm for it. And that pretty well sells it right there. Now, one of the things that we mentioned on Sunday was that there's a tendency sometimes of individuals to fail to recognize the priority of authority first and then jump to expediency when they've never yet established Bible authority to begin with. Well, here's the thing. You cannot expediently do something that ain't authorized to begin with. In order for it to be an expedient way to do something, it's got to be authorized first. Then you can determine the most expedient way to do what's authorized. But you don't jump to the expedient without establishing Bible authority for what you're trying to do to begin with. Some things there is no expedient for because it's not authorized to begin with, you know. So let's don't get the cart before the horse, you know. Let's make sure that we have authority for what we do, and then, is this the most expedient thing for us to do? And not all answers to that question will be the same, you know. There are different localities, different things that people have to deal with in different parts of the world, and so there's no black and white, this is the way it's got to always be around brethren around the world, because we don't know the circumstances that some brethren have to deal with around the world. You know, back when we were doing a whole lot of work with Truth for the World, and I don't know how many copies of, I think it was Uganda songbooks that I made. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of songbooks that I made copies of, you know, and having to get you know, making, of course, copying on both sides and getting, and we didn't have these good ones here where you can sort of less program and it'll do it for you, you know. No, back then you had to do all the turning and the folding and everything, and even got a big old long stapler so that you could staple it halfway across a legal size page and all that, you know. Well, that was a difficult thing. Now, while they're sitting over there in Uganda, I think it was Uganda, while they're sitting over there in Uganda waiting on those songbooks, can they worship in song? Do they have to wait on us to get the songbooks? What if there's somebody over there that horror of horrors has got an overhead projector, and it just so happens the very songs that we're sending over there, they can display them on the wall? Would it be all right for them to watch in? Wouldn't that be the most expedient thing for them to do until they get the songbooks? Well, sure it would. Sure it would. It might be the most expedient thing for them to do even when they get songbooks, especially if nobody in the audience can read, you know. I never thought about that. So we can't expect every situation to have exactly the same answer in doing that which is the expedient thing. So if there's something that's authorized, and here's an expedient way to do it, maybe a more expedient way than we've been doing it, then I'm all for it, you know. Even if I didn't come up with the idea. Sometimes, of course, when people come up with an idea and everybody doesn't jump up and down and say, woo, I wish we'd have known this a long time ago. You're the most wonderful decider of new things of anybody. And everybody shoots it down, then we get sort of offended at that. Well, that shouldn't be the case, you know. That everybody doesn't jump up and down and holler whoopee just because of our so-called most expedient way may not be looked upon as the most expedient way by everybody. Somebody's got to make a decision as to what's going to be done and when, you know. I told you about when we was living up in Smith County, it just so happened that just a few months before we moved up there, they took a vote, the whole congregation took a vote as to meeting time on Sunday morning. And they decided, the majority decided, meet at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning. Well, it just so happened that the preacher that left there and went up to Michigan left me with the bulletins, and he also left me with a tabulation of everybody that voted for 9 o'clock on Sunday morning. Did you know within a year's time there was an uproar over 9 o'clock being too early on Sunday morning? And then you know who it was that was uproaring over it being too early to meet on Sunday morning at 9 o'clock? It was the people that voted to meet at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning. Those very people. Now, they didn't know that I had their names right there, you know, written under 9 o'clock, you know. So I showed it to them. Well, I didn't remember doing that. You know, well, they did. Now, if you're going to help make a decision like that, at least give it time to sink in a little bit, you know. Down there at my grandma and grandpa's congregation down in Tremont, Mississippi, Shady Valley congregation, they met at 8 o'clock on Sunday morning. Somebody says, that's unscriptural. No, it's not, you know. I mean, they get up 5 o'clock every day, 3 hours later than that on Sunday morning, you know. So 8 o'clock. Who's going to decide that ultimately anyhow? Well, if you've got elders, then they are held responsible for making decisions like that. Obviously, taking into consideration other members of the congregation. I remember when we first moved to Mount Airy, there were 2 or 3 families that milked. And so our nighttime services had to be adjusted to take care of the milking time. And we did it, you know. Most time, that's not a problem now. Yes, Jim?
Sometimes, I was held a meeting in Frisco, Texas, in the Dallas area, and they had just after February changed their times to 9, 10, and 11. And that was it. And I think at least 2 or 3 congregations in McMinnville are doing the same thing.
Uh-huh.
It's unusual.
Yeah.
But 9 o'clock worship, 10 o'clock Bible study, 11 o'clock worship again.
Mm-hmm.
Different worship, different sermon, of course.
Uh-huh.
And then they're done for the day. In a metropolitan area like the Dallas area, for example, it does expedite the situation because of travel.
Sure, sure.
So it's different, but that's an expedient.
Exactly.
Commanded to assemble, but the times, you know.
Just left up to the congregation's prerogative. And somebody says, well, I just don't know if I get used to that or not. Well, don't worry about it right now because we're not going to have to consider that. But think about the priority and where we're placing it if we would dig our heels in and say, I just can't see how that could be scriptural, not coming back on Sunday night. Well, believe it or not, there used to be a time in which there was no Sunday night services, you know. And there wasn't any prayer meetings on Wednesday night. And wasn't that long ago, and there's people in the audience that can remember when you didn't even really have preaching but about once every quarter, when a genuine preacher actually came through town and preached. The rest of the time, he was dependent upon whoever happened to be willing to lead a discussion of the Bible on a Sunday morning, you know. So we have to be able to adapt to the changing times and at the same time do that which is the most expedient. In some parts of I think Mount Leo's been doing that for a number of years, you know. And I've been aware of it because when I've been in Warren County and holding meetings, then a big slew of people from Mount Leo will come to the meeting because they're not having Sunday evening services. They had 3 services that morning, and they come and support the meetings, you know. And then I've heard this said, well, if they get used to coming to some other congregation on a Sunday night, then they might like it better than where they're at, and so they end up leaving and pull Mount Leo. If they hadn't changed the nighttime services, that would never happen. Well, you know, I mean, what can you, I mean, you can use just about any excuse you want to avoid doing something that you don't want to do to begin with.
You know, Brother, too, you talk about the singing, and I know at White Oak, when I was still in local work there, our singing was always better when we used the Faithful hymnal. And I think, and others said so too, but the reason was your head is up,
Yeah.
and you're looking at the notes and the words, and your head is up, and your voice is carried better. Our singing was better during that.
Yeah.
But you gotta have somebody, you know, at Memphis, it amazes me at the lectures in Memphis, whoever's leading the song service at 7 o'clock, they'll go through, you know, 30 minutes of singing, and I assume they don't coordinate it ahead of time to tell the people in the booth, but they'll call a number, and that thing's up there,
That's,
because I guess they've got it all, you know,
yeah.
worked out, so that they can, if somebody changes the number, you know, or whatever, they can go with it.
Yeah.
They've got it done, but our singing was always better.
Yeah. Because people are looking up, for sure. And of course, instead of going down to the floor. And of course, anything that expedites our worship service, obviously. I mean, I dare say that's one of the reasons why we have air conditioning and heaters, you know. If people are scared they're going to freeze to death or burn up, you know, and I've been in buildings when we didn't have any air conditioning and it was just miserable. I mean, we had fans in the ceiling up at Mount Airy, but if you turned them things on, you couldn't hear yourself sing, you know. They were so loud, but it did keep a little bit of a breeze going through the building, you know, and you'd stick to the seat and all. So those are things that are expedients to try to assist us in being able to worship better and more comfortable, you know. And so anything along the line of allowing us and helping us to worship better then is truly the correct definition of what an expedient is. So, yes, sir.
You guys go different congregations, you know, I'm sure you find out the order of worship before it starts in the morning. We done talking one time in James Watson's turn, he leaned over, and they got there just as it started. He leaned over and mentioned, what's the order of worship? I said, just like it says in the Bible, there ain't 2 songs of prayer, another song you preach.
That's it. That's it. Bible authority right there. Yeah. And pity the poor person that tries to sing an extra song. You might get pushed off the stage, you know. All right. Notice the conclusion here. Brother Whiteside wrote an excellent little commentary on the book of Romans. Everybody needs to have it in their library. Here's what he says about prejudice. Prejudice is a robber which many of us entertain in our hearts. It robs us of generous feelings which we would have for others and leaves us with tormentings of hate. By shutting our eyes and stopping our ears, it robs us of many precious truths and leaves the dross of distorted opinions. It robs us of life and shuts us up in the blackness of our own ignorance. No other robber can leave us so poor. Do not let your light or life, rather, be made poor by prejudices. Thus let us avoid tightly holding these loose ideas. And anything and everything that we can do to avoid this mentality, then certainly we need to do that. First thing I want us to do is turn to the 27th chapter of the book of Matthew, because I want us to just see just how terrible this particular heart disease is as it relates to the circumstances surrounding the crucifixion of Christ on the cross. And we're going to start reading at verse 11. At verse 11 and read all the way down through verse 26. And of course, this is a section of Scripture which we're generally familiar. But I want you to just make special note of the motivations behind the individuals who fit into this narrative for us. Jesus stood before the governor. Here's the representative of the Roman government. He's none other, of course, Pontius Pilate. And he says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus says, "Thou sayest." And when he was accused of the chief priests and the elders, he answered nothing. And of course, that's talking about Jesus. When he's being accused, lambasted by the religious leaders of the Jews, the Lord didn't say nothing. And Pilate can't understand that. He says, "Hearest thou not how many things they witness against thee?" In other words, are you going to just stand there and let them do that and not give any reply at all back? And he answered him never a word, insomuch that the governor marveled greatly. Now at that feast the governor was wont to release to the people a prisoner, whom they would. In other words, here's a traditional process of allowing someone to go free who is a convicted criminal. Well, here's obvious an opportunity for a truly innocent person to be let go. But that's not what happens. And they had then a notable prisoner, a man by the name of Barabbas. Now, we know from cross-referencing, but it's not found right here, but in Mark's account of this same event, in Mark chapter 15, verse 7, we read that Barabbas was involved in an insurrection in which there were people killed, and he was held responsible for participating in the murder of somebody too. So here's the sinless, perfect Son of God. We can turn him loose, or we can turn this convicted murderer loose. Don't seem to be such a hard decision. Therefore, when they were gathered together, Pilate said unto them, "Whom will ye then that I release unto you, Barabbas, or Jesus, which is called Christ?" For he knew that for envy they had delivered him. Who was responsible for having such an envious, jealous, spiteful attitude towards Jesus? Well, the Jews in general, but primarily who? The leadership of the Jews. Those who had the most to lose if people actually paid attention to what Jesus was saying. Those who had their power and their prestige and their pocketbook adversely affected if what Jesus was saying was accurate. Those are the ones that stood the most to lose and the loudest in opposition to Jesus and what Jesus was trying to accomplish. And, of course, the free moral agency of the rest of the Jews is still in play as well, you know. They were enticed to do what the religious leaders wanted them to do, so they were not guiltless themselves. Therefore, when they were gathered together, Pilate said unto them, for he knew that for envy they had delivered them. Verse 19, when he was set down on the judgment seat, his wife sent to him, that's Pilate, saying, "Don't have anything to do with this just man, for I suffered many things this day in a dream because of him." But the chief priest and the elders persuaded the multitude that they should ask for Barabbas and destroy Christ, or Jesus. The governor answered and said unto them, "Whether of the twain will ye that I release unto you?" They said, "Barabbas." Pilate said, "What shall I do then with Jesus, which is called Christ?" They said, "Let him be crucified." And the governor said, "Why? What evil hath he done?" But they cried out the more, saying, "Let him be crucified." They can't answer the question that he asked. What did he do that's deserving of him being crucified and me turning loose this sorry criminal that's been guilty of murder? Let him be crucified. Let him be crucified. Crucified. They can't rationally entertain any type of discussion. They can't give a reason. They just think by being loud that's going to carry the day, and it does. Here, sadly, it does today in many instances as well. When Pilate saw that he could prevail nothing, but that rather a tumult was made, in other words, his trying to get them to reason with him just resulted in a mob mentality. He took water, washed his hands before the multitude, saying, "I am innocent of the blood of this just person, see ye to it." So here he is now innocent. He has demonstrated his innocence by washing his hands. Says, "I'm not going to have anything to do with this. You do what you want to do." Was he innocent? No, he's still guilty. Well, was he trying to act like he was passing on this guilt to somebody else. That's what he's trying to do. But this would have never happened unless he allowed it to happen. See? So he is guilty. He couldn't wash his hands and absolve himself of any guilt of the matter. Then answered all the people and said, his blood be on us and on our children. Well, guess what? They got what they wanted, because his blood was on them and was on their children. And then he released Barabbas unto them, and when he had scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Now, when you read that, or when you think about that, do you see anything in there where there might be people who, in hearing that, might have a little bit of prejudice towards people about something? Who do you think would and why? I mean, there's been a lot of people killed down through the years because of a misapprehension as to the events that transpired here with Christ dying on the cross. Who actually put Christ on the cross? We did. Everybody did. The sins of mankind did. And so for those that would like to segment the Jews as being the responsible parties and thus treat them in a prejudicial way for the entirety of their existence because they're the ones that said crucify him, crucify him, it was the Roman government, Gentiles, who put him to death. But yet prejudice has been the norm in regards to the Jews, and sadly based upon the idea there here that if it hadn't been for the Jews, then Jesus wouldn't have died on the cross. Well, if it hadn't been for sin, Jesus wouldn't have had to die on the cross. And it was the totality of man's sin that made it necessary for Christ to die on the cross. So the Jews are no more guilty than we are. And if we would categorize a whole nation of people, a whole nationality of people, a whole group of people as the Jews for being responsible and seek to absolve everybody else, then we're doing a terrible disservice to the very reason why Christ died on the cross to begin with. That's prejudice. And that's the way some people try to justify themselves in opposition to Jews. There was a movie came on a couple of weeks ago, and I just saw just a little bit of it, and the introduction of it said there was this, and this is back in the 50s, so it's not long after, and it's supposedly a historical movie. It was in the early 50s, and there was this boy who went to a prep school so he'd be able to get into college. And he was a Jew, but he had to hide his being a Jew because he would not have been allowed to go to that prep school and then would not have been able to go on and done well at a large university that was made necessary by him going to the prep school. And then it got out. Somebody heard the coach. He was a great athlete. And somebody heard the coach saying, no, there's very few people know we got a Jew that's a running back for us, Well, then they had a big knockdown drag out in the Shire over this fellow who had been exposed as a Jew. You filthy Jew. I mean, that was the mentality of Adolf Hitler, wasn't it?
It's hard to say that. How people, Jesus Christ himself is the most influential Jew of all time. How can he do that?
It's just ridiculous. It shows how blind, deaf, and dumb prejudice is.
I think there's lots in the South here. I'm not even trying to prejudice in the South. I'm division. I hope I'm division that you're in the South. You can find guys with his life. You told you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. And Evan, I mean, there's some stories that I know that are true. From just right around here in the absence of Bible authority and the ability for people to imagine and suppose outside of, and matter of fact, in direct contradiction to what the Bible actually says, and then put their case wholly on that very position, which has no basis whatsoever in fact or Scripture. And yet, that describes a large percentage of people in the world today. Plain old, bald-faced prejudice, unjustifiable prejudice that people possess. And again, we're not talking about throwing off on somebody who lives in Alabama because we don't like the Crimson Tide. That's not what we're talking about, That's a joke. We know their soul is just as valuable as a Tennessee Volunteer soul, But but the mentality that allows such as that to get by. You know, I mean, even my sweet little old Aunt Hazel, Daddy's older sister, she said this to me one time. She said, Freddie, I know that black people have a soul, but I don't think they need to be going to church with us. And I said, Hazel. Says, well, that was the time frame in which she was raised. Okay. It was wrong. It was a wrong mentality to possess. And then to beat it all, Daddy's older brother, Paul, he used to go and teach Sunday school at the local black congregation there in Fulton, Mississippi. Of course, they couldn't meet in the same building. Horror of horrors if that would have happened, you know.
Well, I think it's real interesting in here too. People, it was a mob-like thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the people were stirred up by the chief priests and the elders.
Oh, yeah.
And even though it is wrong, and many of the people knew that it was wrong, but the chief priests and the elders had the ability to be able to stir them up against.
What they knew. I mean, they knew against, it's like, honestly, when the Freedom Riders were coming through the South and it was on the evening news and Americans saw it on their television, dogs being turned loose on black people, water hoses being turned loose on black people, little kids, little girls, little boys. That did more to turn this country around as far as recognizing the atrocities of Jim Crow laws and prejudice and everything else more than anything, because they could see it. And right thinking people maybe had never thought about in their whole life, and they had a prejudiced bone in their body because of where they lived. When they saw that on television, they knew that's not right. That's not right. That ain't Christianity. It's the very opposite of Christianity. And that woke some people up. But that mentality, you know, if you're in a group that's like that, it's very hard to stick out like a sore thumb if it might mean your sore thumb gets broke, you know, which very well could have happened. Yeah. That's different. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, that was the thing about this boy in that movie, you know. I mean, even, you know, it's crazy. Crazy. All right. Number 2 here. Prejudice operates both in and out of the church. Yes, it does, you know. We wish we could say the only place in which we find prejudice being exercised at all is outside the body of Christ, but that's not so. Number 3, if one is prejudiced towards the truth, he is an enemy of the truth and of himself as well. Now, that's true. You know, he's his own worst enemy if he's prejudiced against the truth. Number 4, is it scriptural? Should be our first question about any idea, method, or expedient. Exactly. Is there Bible authority for this? Number 5, generation gaps should not exist in the Lord's church. That's true. That's true. Well, it's like, you know, in some areas, even today, among brethren even, different age groups never see each other inside the church building. They're all somewhere else, you know. They never come together as one congregation in one place because the young ones are over here and the little bit older ones are over there, and then of course the old people that can't walk, they're stuck in the same place all the time.
A lot of young people have been taught, or been allowed to believe, you know, ask questions in school, is it wrong to lie? And it's not, and depending on what they, if you might have somebody.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not being taught that it's wrong to lie.
Situation ethics, yeah. It's like the example I gave you about if you go to McDonald's and they accidentally give you more change back than unanimous. Do not dare mention to the person that gave you too much change, they gave you too much change. Consider it your lucky day and go spend it quickly. Yeah, that was a unanimous decision that was made. And of course, that could have been mob mentality too. And if you could took each individual kid and asked them separately from that, then there had been some, hopefully, that would answer correctly, you know.
We hear those folks saying, out of the mouths of babes.
Yeah,
And, you know, thing up there at the last, the leaders, some of those, speeches they had within it, it made some very, very good points within it. Just the few I heard.
yeah,
Just, and how old was David
yeah,
when he took on Goliath?
well, yeah. A mere teenage lad. But he showed himself to be a man when his brothers were wimps, you know, even though they were full grown physically. Spiritually, they were midgets or vertically challenged. Sorry. Lord willing, we'll pick up right here to prepare for if we happen to get further than prepare by reading the book of Ecclesiastes, at least the first chapter, because we're gonna go through the book of Ecclesiastes next in a series, which of course not going to take a long time, but I think it'd be good for us to do that for a little while and learn some practical assistance from that wonderful book too. Is there anything else? Thank you so much.
You want this carried over, Freddie? Or you want this carried over? All right.
You haven't, man, it's from Potter's Children's Home. It is.
Oh, okay. Good deal.
Hey, did Gregory and them say anything about Sunday night services? Or
Uh,
Gregory services? Do you mind briefing me?